Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Welcome to Green Hope Foundation's side event at the 15th World Forestry Congress on addressing gender inequalities in forest-dependent communities through a circular bioeconomy. My name is Kehkasha. I am the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I will be your moderator for today's side event. There is now an increased awareness and acknowledgement of the intersectionality of land access and rights for gender equality and how climate change is exacerbating this. However, within this paradigm is another complexity, one that is yet to achieve mainstream consciousness and is largely ignored. And that is about the vast gender disparities that exist and continue to widen in forest-dependent communities, and whose vulnerabilities continue to be exacerbated through the inequality multipliers of climate change, urbanization, biodiversity loss, consequent migration, and now the pandemic. Naturally, the global recovery process too has not given this critical dimension its due importance, even though the quantum and width of stakeholders impacted by it is significant. It is still largely dependent on non-state actors like us who've continued to work within these communities at a grassroots level while simultaneously engaging in policy dialogues at multilateral institutions to draw attention and mitigate the impacts of gender inequalities in forest-dependent communities. Today's discussion, therefore, holds special relevance and will shine a light on how women are uniquely contributing to forest value chains that are critical not only to their livelihoods, but as an extension of their families and therefore the community's well-being and food security. Our objective today is to amplify the call for a gender-smart circular bioeconomy, as this is a proven pathway that will ensure that women's role in forest protection is recognized and that they have their rightful seat at the decision-making table to implement long-term solutions for the preservation of forests and forest-dependent communities. We are absolutely delighted to have with us today an eminent panel of experts who will share their interdisciplinary and global perspectives towards achieving the objectives of this discussion. So with that, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Ms. Maria Fernandez Espinoza, former president of the UN General Assembly and senior fellow of the Robert Bosch Academy. Due to her extensive travels yesterday and today, Ms. Maria was unable to join us in person at the last minute, but she was able to send us a video message instead.
Thank you very much, Kekashan and the Green Hope Foundation for inviting me to this side event at the 15th World Forestry Congress. And we are here to address a very critical issue, which is gender inequalities in forest-dependent communities. And I would like to take this opportunity to speak about Indigenous women and not only as victims of discrimination and exclusion, but more importantly as knowledge holders, as forest dwellers, as the very embodiment of resilience and sustainable forest management and biodiversity conservation. So allow me to start with some numbers, with some figures to realize the context we face. There are an estimated 476 million indigenous peoples worldwide. Although indigenous peoples represent 6% of the world population, they make up of 19% of the extremely poor. So this is the first inequality and the first injustice. They have a lower life expectancy, and they often lack recognition over their lands and territories, and most are unattended by public policies and investment regarding health, education, access to justice, and decision making in the political sphere. And if we speak about indigenous women, of course, they make up for half of the world's population, and they count for approximately 240 million around the world. And we have to acknowledge that since the beginning of times, indigenous women have played a fundamental role in preserving their own livelihoods, their languages, the cultures, cosmogony, their territories. And yet, indigenous women also face the constraints and difficulties of a male-dominated system and society that discriminates and hinders their individual and collective rights. So they are discriminated because they're women and because they are indigenous. They are constantly placed in situations of vulnerability, such as food insecurity, unequal access to quality education and health, property over their lands and territories. They carry the burden of protecting their livelihoods from increasing threats such as climate change, but unsustainable exploitation and production patterns. In recent years, we have heard more discussions about circular bioeconomy, portraying this concept as a new economic model or as a breakthrough to reduce waste, unsustainable use of resources, and to put nature first. So I think that we have to acknowledge that indigenous women have mastered this concept from times immemorial. They are traditional food providers, custodians of seeds, keepers of medicinal plants, guardians of biodiversity. And indigenous women are extremely resourceful and can cope with the scarcity of resources to benefit their communities. We have seen it during the hard times of COVID. We have seen it in situation of major climate-related disasters in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in small island developing states. But we cannot ignore that despite of the wealth and versatility of indigenous traditional knowledge, women in forest-dependent communities face increasingly huge challenges. We mentioned that, but extreme weather events from climate change are highly impacting forest ecosystems and forest communities. Changes in temperatures and rainfall patterns resulted in prolonged droughts, drying of rivers and streams, frequent flooding. Extreme warm conditions affect forest ecosystems and their provision of goods and services for the communities that depend on them. So climate change also increases the likelihood of more frequent and more intense and devastating wildfires, such as the ones we have witnessed in the last 2 years in North America, in Siberia, in the Mediterranean region, in Australia, and of course in the Amazon rainforest in my part of the world, Ecuador. So the truth is that forest-related traditional knowledge, ecosystem conservation and restoration, the mitigation and adaptation to climate change, and the struggle for gender equality are interconnected. They are interdependent, a part of a virtuous cycle. More equal societies, less gender discrimination, lead to a better distribution of resources and to an increased knowledge and understanding of sustainable forest management. So we need to think about solutions that are holistic, that are able to improve the living conditions of indigenous women that lead to the empowerment and improvement of their quality of life at the same time as they protect the forest ecosystems. And we have seen many examples of that. Let me quickly pick the example of Sub-Saharan Africa. Initiatives to conserve forests go hand in hand with household energy management. We know that in this part of the world, 90% of the energy used by households comes from burning firewood for cooking and heating. So if we have forests that are being affected, dismantled, deforested, we know that women have to walk longer distances to get the firewood. So it is increasingly difficult and an increasing burden on women because of the depletion of forests and the difficult access to firewood. If we are talking about bioeconomy and a solution from a bioeconomic perspective, the key would be, for example, in this case, to decrease firewood burning and use alternatives such as biomass. And this is very much connected to traditional knowledge. We know that women can transform waste into biomass and encourage other members of the community to also diversify and improve household energy consumption, just to give you one example. I think that basically these examples show us that what is the potential for indigenous women to improve their daily lives, and indigenous communities can live better when ecosystems and forests are well managed and sustainably managed through a circular economy. So there are changes proposed from traditional knowledge, and considering that crucial tasks that women carry out within their communities can also decrease their workload and their physical effort, and allow them to devote more time to education, to intellectual work, to community interaction. So I think that I would like to close by saying that the key to sustainable development and sustainable livelihood, especially in indigenous communities, is our capacity to listen and learn from local practices and traditional knowledge, especially from indigenous women's knowledge. And it is also about ensuring that indigenous women participate fully in decision making at all levels, including in politics. So sustainable forest management alternatives require a gender perspective and need to uphold the invaluable knowledge, contribution, and rights of rural and indigenous women. And this should be a central component of circular economies. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maria, for sharing your perspectives with us and highlighting not just the victimization, but the leadership role that Indigenous women have for centuries and can continue to take, the leadership role that they have in maintaining and preserving our forests and forest-dependent communities, and why it's so important to recognize their role in ensuring the protection of our forests and the creation of a sustainable planet. Thank you so much once again. And with that, I shall now invite our next speaker, Mr. Satya Tripathi, who is the Secretary General of the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Kehkashan, and greetings everyone. It is indeed my pleasure and privilege to be here sharing some insights from the ground. Apart from our work at the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet, I also happen to be the Chancellor of the Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences, which is the world's largest institution dedicated solely to indigenous peoples and cultures. We teach 60,000 children, or we can call them students because they're from kindergarten to postgraduate and PhDs and postdocs. And it's an entirely free institution, it's a charity. We do not receive a single penny from any student for any of the services rendered. And today we were discussing in our governing body that today happens to be the day actually where the movement in support of global indigenous communities and in remembrance of the murdered, missing, harassed, assaulted, and indignified behavior with indigenous women and girls around the world. We understand very little about what indigenous people actually do, especially women. 470 million indigenous people actually look after 80% of the world's biodiversity. And their knowledge of how to protect nature is crucial in tackling climate change. They stand up to some of the worst corporations that indulge in the gravest of nature destroying practices and at grave threat to their lives and liberty. So I would start by celebrating their lives and respecting their contributions to where we are today in terms of conservation, in terms of protecting our biodiversity, in terms of protecting our natural heritage. Now, talking about women, I also happen to be involved in something called the Community Managed Natural Farming Program, the world's largest agroecology-based agriculture program. It's in the state of Andhra Pradesh in India, where about 1 million farmers have actually converted from chemical fertilizers and pesticides-based farming to natural farming. But before that, I would like to really highlight one thing that is completely missing in the conversation. It's not just the invisibility of women and their contributions to protecting Mother Nature, but also the invisibility of their economic contributions. And of course, one could talk about the domestic work they do, whether they are mothers or sisters and daughters, which is hardly ever recognized. But a few years ago, when I was heading UN ORCID, the UN's Office for Red Plus Coordination, set up then by the then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and I was the Chief of Mission based out of Jakarta. We collaborated with someone who will then go on to win the Tyler Prize, which is also known as the Nobel Prize for Environment, Pawan Sukhdev, the former president of Worldwide Fund for Nature. And so we invited Pawan to join us in undertaking a study called GDP of the Poor in the forests of central Kalimantan, in an island which is also known as Borneo in another country, but here they call it Kalimantan. And what we found was revealing. Women actually, through their contributions in protecting the forest and drawing from the forest in a sustainable way, were actually earning anywhere up to $300 a month in terms of non-timber forest products and the cash equivalent of the services they drew from the forests. So if that were to be recognized, actually we will keep all our forests. So the reason we make it invisible is that then it makes it very easy to destroy the forests and disenfranchise the people that live off these natural resources without destroying them forever. And so that was a learning moment for me, despite the fact that I knew quite a bit, but this was completely a revelation that the kind of contribution that women make to protecting nature, and once you quantify their contributions in economic terms, it doesn't figure in any country's GDP, literally. No country, no matter how big or small, how resourceful or underprivileged, it just doesn't figure. Now, going to the experience in Andhra Pradesh, where they have actually managed to organize more than 7 million women. I mean, it used to be 11.5 million women, but the state got bifurcated into 2 states. So the current state of Andhra Pradesh actually has more than 7 million women organized in self-help groups of 10 women each. And the kind of work they have done in turning away from fossil fuel-based synthetic fertilizer and pesticide-based agriculture to completely restorative, regenerative agriculture is extraordinary. It has dropped costs of farming per crop cycle by anywhere up to 80%, depending on the crop one cultivates. The yields have gone up anywhere between 28% to 200%. And it is bringing about the kind of prosperity at the grassroots, all women led. And when we, the so-called intellectually gifted people, and I call so-called because sometimes our intellect completely loses the plot, and that's why we've been debating if climate change is real for the last 50 years. My former organization, UNEP, is just celebrating the Stockholm Plus 50 years of founding of that organization. And it is extraordinary how the people that have the best of resources and intellect completely miss the plot as compared to these women that have hardly been to through any formal systems of education, hardly been to any school worth mentioning. And they are willing to take all these risks because their life, mind you, depends on what they make in one crop cycle. Their lives, the lives of their families, their children, schooling of their children, nutrition, health, everything depends on if they make enough in a crop cycle so that they can live on to the next. And they are willing to take these existential risks, shunning chemical agriculture and taking to natural farming, where you start respecting nature and bringing back agriculture within the healing threshold of nature so that you actually grow things without destroying anything. And we are already seeing that at a scale that is extraordinary. You'll be surprised to know that the German Development Bank last year put $300 million into this program, their first such investment anywhere on the planet. Because they normally put money into renewable energy and things that are more predictable and more easy to manage. And so they stepped out of their comfort zone and put $300 million at only 0.5% interest. Extraordinary. Even the World Bank doesn't lend to anybody with that kind of cost. But what is even more gratifying is that this particular state currently spends $600 million a year in chemical fertilizer subsidies and $1 billion a year on farm electricity subsidies. Once they are done with converting all their 6 million farmers to natural farming, all women led, it will actually save the government every year close to $2 billion by the time they get done with the price inflation. And in real cost terms, it'll be roughly $2 billion they'll be saving every year. So that's the power of women. When you unleash that power, when you show the respect, when you care for what they stand for and provide them the resources to take that leadership role, we can actually turn the tide, not just on the environmental degradation that the world has seen for many decades now, but also the existential climate challenge that confronts us head on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi. Absolutely. First of all, thank you for sharing the amazing work that you and your associates are doing. And, it's so true that by making women's role in forest protection invisible, it just paves the way and makes it easier for us to exploit and destroy forests and destroy our planet. And it is very strange to see, as you said, these so-called intellectuals where we only see knowledge in one way. We kind of completely ignore the fact that knowledge production and knowledge dissemination differs in different parts of the world in different spheres. And by ignoring the very important knowledge held by these women who have forever been managing and protecting our forests, we are slowly and steadily destroying our planet. So we really need to reevaluate what we see as knowledge and make sure that we go on to the right path right now. So thank you for sharing your views once again. I shall now invite our next panelist, Ms. Jan Mcalpine, who is the former director of the United Nations Division on Forests and former head of the United Nations Forum on Forests. And she is also, like myself and Ms. Maria Fernandez Espinoza, a counselor at the World Future Council. So Jan, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I really appreciate this panel, Kekishan. I think it's brilliant of you to do. I would note actually today is where we are doing this this session is the Cinco de Mayo, the 5th of May, which is a very important date in the Northern Hemisphere here. As a child, I watched women carrying tall stacks of wood on top of their heads, carrying babies, sometimes one in the back, and sometimes two, front and back, as they traveled home after a long trip to find firewood. Perhaps this influenced me to get into my work with forests and trees. I will never know. But certainly what I saw in terms of poverty and the hard work of women in those economies at the time had a huge influence on me. I grew up in Southern and Central Africa, in Rwanda and Burundi in the 1950s and 60s. That makes me 70. And like most 70-year-olds, people often will say to you, here's this new idea, circular bioeconomy. And I will respond like people of my generation to say, but this is not new. However, as the previous speakers and Kekishan have pointed out, it has not been recognized as the most efficient way to treat these important products in our economy, in our world. So even then, more than now perhaps, women operated in this circular bioeconomy, but without the participation of national policies in general, as has been pointed out, or recognition of this informal economy. And that, by the way, that should be an important theme of our discussion today, the lack of recognition, which, as Maria has said, and our previous speaker has said, reinforces a lack of recognition, a lack of support for women in their roles. Economic policies of the time supported moving to industrialized approaches, horizontal rather than circular approaches. While many of the African women I knew were carrying wood and water on their heads, walking for long miles in daily treks to care and feed for their families, my mother also cared for a family of 6 children. She bought wheat in large bags, washed it several times. I remember helping her to find small stones in the wheat laid out on mats in our kitchen. We then baked the wheat, ground the wheat, and finally made bread with it. Our neighboring African women, by contrast, used cassava, called manioc in Rwanda, boiling it to get rid of the poison, drying it and grinding it to create flour used to make bread. In both cases, wood was used as the energy source to bake these breads. I love to eat both kinds and am remembering fondly my mother's breakfast cinnamon rolls. I assure you though, when you do this much work to get a meal, you are very careful not to waste even one part of the product. The outside of the cassava, what is left in the washing of the wheat, was used to recycle piles to create lovely soil over time. The African women and my mother were concerned about economizing, which led to reuse and recycling as much as possible. Every aspect of food was to use as much as possible from the food they made. Eggshells, for example, were put on a recycled pile to create this nice dark soil for growing vegetables. My mother and the African women did exactly the same thing. This concept is at the heart of a circular bioeconomy. The concept was not invented in the last few years. Our mothers and grandmothers used it many years ago. But again, it was not recognized. It is still not recognized in most of our government systems, economic practices, and it's certainly not internalized as the inherent best way to use wood products for energy and heating. So one clear aspect of a circular bioeconomy focuses on the reuse and recycling of materials. Excuse me. How does that look in practice today? In some parts of the world, there has been a commercialization of the provision of wood for cooking or heating, while in others, the age-old practice of women needing to carry these products for hours continues. In preparing for my discussion with you today, I read a very interesting article by Deanna Ramsey of C4, in which she focuses on a number of recycling projects run by women in Kenya, wherein the use of twigs and branches of trees to create charcoal is valued instead of cutting down the trees and using the entire tree. I am, of course, very aware of the global concerns about charcoal as a fuel source, which creates its own kind of pollution and health problems. However, in countries such as Kenya, these are the sources of energy available to a large group of people. In fact, in Central Africa at this time, as Maria said originally, wood energy comprises 90% of household use for cooking and heating. And women are responsible for the backbreaking labor of collecting and transporting firewood. Ramsey also introduces to me a Kenyan scientist, Mary Njenga, who is quoted in this paper and says that a workable circular bioeconomy approach here would acknowledge people's needs for wood energy, adding local landscape-aware twists. She goes on to say that many people think that using wood for energy creates forest degradation, but the circular bioeconomy perspective is let's not cut down the tree, but rather use branches and some stems, allowing the tree to grow and provide other services. Eco charcoal, which Ramsey describes, is one of a number of female-led enterprises in Kenya using tree pruning to create charcoal. Other of these enterprises also use recycled wood materials. Do look up the article by Ramsey. It is rich in information on this topic. In Kenya, charcoal contributes $1.6 billion to the economy and directly employs about 1 million people in production and trade. But work with charcoal is not part of the formal economy, she says. The numbers are significant elsewhere in countries with forests and trees. I would be remiss if I did not mention bamboo as another forest-related product, which I've just lost my, there it is, my notes. If I did not mention bamboo as a very important forest-related product, which is also used in countries, many of them semi-arid or which have semi-arid areas, such as Ethiopia, Thailand, or Costa Rica, depending on the local ecosystems in their changing landscapes. Now, I need to go on to say, however, to these thoughts. And what we need to figure out is how do we transition, how do we both use this bioeconomy approach with wood product, but at the same time, find a way to support the women in ways that Maria described, for example, to get the economic and social recognition they need, to get the health support they need, and perhaps to recognize that over time, new technologies could become available. But at this point in time, in many, many countries, there is no alternative. We have to take a stepwise approach to get to the point where other sources are possible. And so I often said in my work, in many of my speeches that I gave at the UNFF, I often said, you cannot put a fence around a forest. Total protection and conservation simply ignores the reality of the populations living within or around forests and the need for energy for cooking and cleaning. Another concern I would raise is with respect to refugees. The number of refugees worldwide is expanding, and their need for cooking and heating energy becomes much more complicated. Women continue to be viewed in most cultures as the one who must obtain the wood for this purpose, or the bamboo. In places where refugees are close to forests, the women venture in to find wood. And an associated significant problem is in many cases it leads to rape and even murder. The responsibility for cooking and heating rests solidly on the shoulders of women in so many countries around the world. We need to be practical and reinforce the best practices from these countries, recognizing that transforming to other energy sources will take time. Meantime, I will leave with a quote from Njenga. She said, the circular bioeconomy perspective is that you are really making use of every resource that can be recovered, reducing waste and pollution. Instead of throwing away waste, it can be collected, and then you sell it again as an input to another process. So an output or waste from one process becomes an input to another, increasing its value. Wood is an incredibly important resource. We've talked a lot about the declining number or areas of forest cover around the world. But for the moment, we need to address this very significant issue of the lack of recognition, the lack of support, the absolute ignorance about the role that this silent economy has and its importance in terms of what it can contribute to the idea of a circular bioeconomic situation in countries around the world. Thank you, Kekishan.
Thank you so much, Jen. Yes, absolutely. Thank you first for sharing your lived experiences. And what really stood out to me is when you said that when that much work goes into making a meal, you're careful not to waste anything. And you highlighted examples of how all parts of the food and the meal making process were utilized to their fullest potential. And that in itself is an example of a circular bioeconomy. And you're absolutely right. Lack of support and this absolute ignorance of the silent economy that is run by women of color, by indigenous women all across the world to protect our forests and nature, how that ignorance and lack of support is just making us and putting us on the wrong path towards exploitation and destruction of nature. But we need to rectify that as soon as possible if we are to achieve the SDGs and create a healthy and safe planet for all. So thank you once again. I shall now invite our next speaker, Ms. Elizabeth Eggerts, who is Gender and REDD+ Specialist, Climate and Forest Program at the United Nations Development Program. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Firstly, can everyone hear me okay? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everyone here. And Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much to the Green Hope Foundation for inviting UNDP to speak today and allow us to be part of this really important and critical conversation, and also allowing us to showcase how we at UNDP are ensuring that women across different stakeholder groups and specifically in forest-dependent communities are equitably and actively involved in zero deforestation value chains. And just quickly to highlight, as we've seen in our work at UNDP, women's involvement and contribution to these value chains and in corresponding decision-making processes are not only crucial to the success of those value chains, but also to women's livelihoods, as well as those of their families. And in fact, promoting gender equality and women's empowerment is a critical pillar of UNDP's support to countries, as it not only helps to support a human rights-based approach to development, but really, as we all seen of our work here, is really just smart business. Women, in addition to men, are key agents of change whose knowledge and experience are key to effectively and sustainably fighting climate change and protecting forests. So what I would like to do here today is to illustrate how UNDP is helping to support countries and jurisdictions around the world in this effort. And the two examples that I would like to showcase today, one is from the Latin American region and the other one is from the Asia Pacific region. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that I have here that I would like to share. Let me go ahead and see. Okay, just quickly to ask, can everyone see my screen okay? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let me see if I can get it up to the slide. Perfect. So to get started, firstly, I would like to showcase the UNDP supported and Green Climate Fund financed work in Ecuador, which is focused on providing financial and land use planning instruments to reduce emissions from deforestation. And in brief summary, this project began in 2017 and focuses on controlling agricultural expansion into forest areas while also reducing deforestation from agricultural and livestock production practices. So just to briefly highlight what's been key about this project that really has started at the beginning as part of project design was ensuring that gender is mainstreamed in all of the project outputs. So that includes one, developing the efforts and the output on developing local and regional plans around advancing forest conservation and sustainable development, as well as supporting sustainable and deforestation-free production around commodity production. Also putting conservation, restoration, and sustainable forest management practices in place. And then lastly, the last input in which gender has also been integrated is around governance systems. And that's been really key, as we've discussed here, is making sure that women are part of these decision-making processes. It's not just making sure that they're a beneficiary, but really they're part of the discussion and the decisions that are being made on things that very much impact their lives. So, but in this process, what's key to also note, what the project's done is also to look at some of, as we've discussed here, there are many different obstacles that when we're working at, with forest dependent communities around gender inequalities that we need to address. And some of these, for example, are the need to looking to help increase the political will to actually include a gender approach within sustainable production, climate change, as well as land use plans. In the forest sector, we see in our work, there are so many different, it's such a male-dominated sector. And so ensuring that women's voices are present and that they're part of the discussion and that they're also engaging in the work is so often a huge hurdle that we have to face, that we make sure that when we're working with countries, that's part of the work that we're ensuring that's going on to try to address some of these gaps and obstacles. Another obstacle it's been faced by the project that we're looking that the project's been trying to take steps to overcome in the gender approach that's used is addressing some of the stereotypes on the role of women that then govern activities of political participation, value chain production, credit, access to finance, and then of course, using management of forest resources. So in part of this effort to address some of these obstacles, we've also undertaken specific activities to approach that gender mainstreaming activities also then do not overburden women because there's often underlying issues that are in place. So we don't want to make sure that women aren't overburdened, that their time use, there's a negative impact on their time use within the project either, or also have unintended consequences such as increasing domestic violence because you're challenging and changing gender roles and what women and men are doing within communities. So some of the steps that have been taken to help try to address these issues have been organizing local violence prevention workshops to raise awareness around young men as well as women around these issues. In addition, there's been effort to bringing together the different actors from local governments, national governments, civil society, international organizations to show support for the positive actions of women through what's been known as the Purple Boots campaign. And this really goes to show that there's such a value added in ensuring that women, in addition to men, as well as youth, the value that they can all contribute to this work. It's a win-win for everybody, but it's a slow process, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. And a lot of awareness raising needs to go on to try to kind of break through some of these gender obstacles and barriers. And it's really this campaign has demonstrated the valuable contribution that women have to forest conservation efforts, as well as helps to coordinate efforts to reduce gender gaps in the Amazon within the country as well. So just to quickly highlight, as a result of this work, just looking specifically around the output that's of the project that's focused on deforestation-free value chains. I've noted here a couple of key achievements that we were able to undertake in 2021. So for example, 39% of the over 4,000 producers that were involved into transitioning into sustainable and forestry production, or 39% of those were women, and in a very normally dominated sector. That's quite an achievement. And working in other countries, we don't get those numbers. So that's been really, I think, a really good positive impact from this project in Ecuador. In addition, we have of the 15 bio-entrepreneurships that have been supported by the project, 2 were specific to women's organizations, and 4 were then also led by women. And then lastly, currently what's been going on in 2021 and continued on to 2022 is looking at how lines of credit for sustainable and deforestation-free production are being designed with gender criteria in place to help minimize access barriers faced by women as much as possible. So among some of the options being explored by the project is the elimination of spouses' signature requirements, also elimination of guarantees up to certain amounts. They're also looking to carry out training processes for business agents to eliminate existing biases related to stereotypes of women and their credit management, and also providing financial education for potential beneficiaries as well. So so I think it's still very much a project that's ongoing for the next year or two, but I think some of these achievements are definitely some good practices we're also applying in other work in other countries that we are supporting. And then lastly, I just wanted to showcase some of the gender mainstreaming efforts that UNDP is undertaking within the value chain support that is providing under the UN-RED program in Vietnam. And before moving forward, I thought it would just be helpful to give a brief background of what the UN-RED program is for some of those who might not know. It is a program, a collaborative program on reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries, with the participating UN agencies of UNDP, UNEP, and FAO. And it's also the UN Knowledge and Advisory Platform on Forest Solutions to the climate crisis. So within this context, phase 2 of the UN RED program in Lao Chai province, that was what this project was concentrated on, and it really looked to how natural forest-based economic models can also support the active participation of women. So what the support looked to do was to initiate public-private partnerships between provincial governments, ethnic minority communities, and businesses selling traditional medicine, which were actually being managed and harvested according to indigenous knowledge. And it was these traditional medicines that were actually the most, from the communities that were selling them, it was actually mostly women. So through these public-private partnerships that were set up with partner companies, it provided local women with access to markets which they had previously lacked. And it was then these partnerships that opened up a more stable market for the products being sold by the local women from these forest communities as well. So in this process, the support also worked with the women to complement their knowledge with training. Excuse me. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Baby, I'm talking right now. Okay. That's good. That's good, baby. If that's just not perfect for a gender workshop. Sorry, my son just came in. So, excuse me, I'll continue to where I was. So in this process, the support also looked to work with the women to complement their knowledge with training on sustainable forest harvesting techniques, as well as help them to set up cooperatives at the commune level with the women who were actually involved in the harvesting of the traditional medicine. So in the end, what this project and the support provided, it gave the local women who were dependent on the forest for their income. It gave them they allowed them to have a significant positive impact on this project on their livelihoods. It helped them to increase their income and helped to secure for them a viable future for both their traditional knowledge as well as for the sustainable use of forests. And what this project goes to show is it really kind of goes to show the power of women and the key agent of change that they have in this work, and how that can be leveraged in the stewardship of forests and in RED+ action and for economic development. So all these pillars of sustainable development and how that could be, and the potential of that to have that operate on a more influential scale in other countries and jurisdictions around the world. So I'll go ahead and stop there and just want to thank everyone for their time. And I'll pass the floor back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing the amazing work that UNDP is doing all around the world, engaging with grassroots actors, getting all genders involved, and particularly working with grassroots actors who are approaching the engagement and empowerment of women in forest protection and recognizing their leadership role in myriad ways, which I think is so important to understand as well, and how they all have that same goal of ensuring that women's role in this movement is recognized and the leadership role is properly recognized. So thank you once again. And with that, I shall now invite our next speaker, Gertrude Kinyangi, who is the Executive Director of Support for Women in Agriculture and Environment. Gertrude, the floor is yours. Gertrude, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me now. Thank you very much for being on this, for inviting me to be part of this wonderful panel. And what I'm going to say, I do not mean to contradict any person, but it's feelings from my experience. I'm from a grassroots community. I'm from a forest-dependent community. So there are many buzzwords and catchphrases. There are many buzzwords these days and catchphrases being bandied around. Sustainability, nature-based, and now circular economy. What is a biocircular economy? A little search revealed that a circular bioeconomy is an economy powered by nature. It's a new economic model that emphasizes the use of renewable natural capital and focuses on minimizing waste. Although, of course, I protest that it's a new economic model. This is what we've done from time immemorial, replacing the wide range of non-renewable fossil-based products currently in use. Can it address gender inequalities in forest-dependent communities? Well, left on its own, a circular bioeconomy would not change an iota of gender inequalities in forest-dependent communities. This is because gender inequalities in the forest sector, like everywhere else, are rooted in patriarchy. This is a system of governance where men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. It creates unequal gender power relations right from the household right up to the highest institution. Patriarchy exists in traditional as well as modern systems. As such, the inequalities are no longer rooted in social norms and cultural practices or discriminatory institutional frameworks alone. In the current neoliberal world order, which puts profit over people and planet, creating unsustainable levels of consumption and production, degrading the environment, women are disempowered, whether it is a circular bioeconomy or not. This is because male-dominated corporations grab power and resources, such as forests, which they clear for planting palm oil, oil palm, sugarcane, soybean, precipitating the collapse of entire ecosystems. With a collapsed ecosystem, what circular bioeconomy is there to empower women? To ensure women's empowerment, the governance of forests should be human rights based. That means governance of the forest resource should be participatory, accountable, and non-discriminatory. States should respect the sovereignty, knowledge, and rights of forest-dependent communities, men and women. States should protect forest-dependent communities, both men and women, from powerful multilateral, multinational corporations. Oftentimes, we see governments of weak, fragile states, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, going behind the back of their citizens and negotiating away their forest-based source of livelihood. States should fulfill their duty towards forest-dependent peoples by empowering them with accurate, timely, and relevant information, building their capacity to engage in forest governance. Furthermore, gender power relations in access to, control of, and decision-making regarding productive resources must be transformed for real, not just in policy, but also in practice. It's not enough to have laws and policies. A policy is as good as its implementation. The disproportionate unpaid care workload borne by women has to be recognized, reduced, and redistributed to free some time for them to engage in the circular bioeconomy. Only then can we even begin to talk of empowering women with the circular bioeconomy. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Gertrude, for sharing first your lived experiences being from a forest-dependent community. And yes, for highlighting that well, everywhere we do sometimes fall back on buzzwords, but very few people actually have the knowledge and understanding of what those words mean. Where lies the problem, because we can talk a lot about this at policy making, but we need to ensure that it's actually implemented at the ground level, and the change is driven by grassroots actors with support from all other stakeholders, so that all sections of society are able to come together to create a sustainable planet. So thank you for being with us today. And you are joining us from South Korea, where the Forestry Congress is taking place. So thank you for being with us. And now I shall invite our next panelist, Pragna Vasubal, member of the Board of Directors and Head of Events of Green Hope Foundation. Pragna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kekashan. It is truly an honor to speak among such esteemed panelists. So I'm really grateful to be a part of this panel. As we all know, nature has been long revered as Mother Earth, from stories to centuries-old cultures. In Hindu mythology, nature is worshipped in the guise of a goddess called Bhumi or Bhudevi. And there are different ceremonies and festivals that commemorate the sacred and divine primordial Mother Goddess. Mother Nature was known to the ancient Greeks and Romans as Gaia and Terra, respectively, who gave birth to all life forms. Despite the presence of symbols and portrayals personifying nature as a mother in forest communities for a long time, women are discriminated against when it comes to decision-making in the same forest communities. In these patriarchal social institutions, the coexistence of various forms of oppression with sexism is even more harmful to women, especially those who are already oppressed. Around the world, over 1 billion women rely on forests for their livelihoods. They are the primary users of forest resources across the developing world. Women are largely responsible for the collection of forest products for various reasons, such as fuel, fodder, medicines, and their sale of these non-timber products is vital to help cover household expenses and tide them through the leaner times of the year. They depend on forest resources to feed their families and contribute to the household income. All this means that the women have more at stake than men due to their heavy dependence on forests. Yet, their work is unpaid, undervalued, and unrecognized. As a result of the existence of patriarchal structures, it has led to the masculinization of customary land ownership and the setting up of male-controlled systems of common pool resources. There exists deep-rooted gender gaps in participation and leadership in forest bodies. As eloquently mentioned by the other panelists, women face many barriers in these forest-dependent communities. Women have limited resource rights and limited access to technologies, information, benefits, and markets. They're also denied employment and training opportunities. Women's participation in value chains is usually limited to harvesting and small-scale retail trade, while men dominate larger businesses and tend to engage in higher value chains. This is due to the perception in societies that women are not well suited for such a physically demanding job, even when women have proved this wrong through resilience and hard work. This has even led to violence against women because of the male perception as the controllers of the household. Moreover, women own a great deal of knowledge on natural resource management. Their knowledge is valuable when it comes to dealing with the current climate crisis. We can utilize their unique expertise to come up with solutions to reduce emissions from forest degradation and better resource management. What is worth mentioning is that women view forests as a precious resource, as opposed to men who view forests as a lucrative asset. And many opportunities are missed, and investments are simply not that effective if they are not gender responsive. It doesn't make sense to turn a blind eye to half of the society, especially at a dire time like this, when climate change is the biggest threat to humanity. We need a system that includes every member of the forest community and puts nature at its center. Therefore, a gender-responsive circular bioeconomy would be transformational at both fronts. It would bring gender balance in the decision-making bodies, boost the security of women's land tenure rights, as well as create greater emphasis on biodiversity conservation, land restoration, and ecosystem management. This is the main essence of our work at Green Hope Foundation. Gender equality is an integral part of Green Hope Foundation, and our work is on feminist sustainable development, where we focus on empowering women, especially in marginalized societies, as they are the ones most often left behind. Globally, we are providing training on sustainable agriculture along with providing organic seeds. Through livestock distribution, we are transforming women into poultry farming entrepreneurs. They eat 40% of the products themselves, which improves their health, and the remainder is sold to support their livelihoods. Instead of being compelled to sell their daughters into child marriage, these rural women leaders have evolved into decision makers, which was previously unimaginable of in their community. Another way of ensuring a gender balance in development policies and decision-making bodies in accordance with the intersection with climate change is by increasing the collection and use of data on the gender-environment nexus. This was Green Hope Foundation's proposal as part of the UN Women Action Coalition for Feminist Action on Climate Justice. We highlighted the importance of development of disaggregated data by social factors including age, race, socioeconomic status, sexuality, marital status, disability, literacy levels to ensure a more intersectional data collection and distribution in relation to environmental challenges. The lack of disaggregated data to represent the unique challenges faced by women and girls hinder the progress of creating a resilient future where no one is left behind. We have also planted fruit trees in Western India, Bangladesh, and with the indigenous women of a community in Peru for food security and stopping land degradation in forest-dependent communities. Security is also a concern for women in forest communities who are more vulnerable if they travel long distances or travel by themselves for forest-related work. So we have also installed solar streetlights in Liberia and Bangladesh for the safety of women. Women also face discrimination in the market when marketing their produce directly and also can be stymied by lack of language skills, access to information, or training. This is why at Green Hope Foundation, we believe that education is an indispensable tool to empower women and young girls. To empower young girls, we have launched our mobile libraries. This way, we fulfill our goal to leave no one behind. Due to the pandemic, these girls have not been able to attend school. We conduct academies, but not everyone can come to these academies and workshops. So we have decided to bring education to their doorstep. This is also in congruence with SDG 7, clean energy, as our mobile libraries are solar powered. We have also provided clean energy to schools by installing solar panels in schools in forest-dependent communities in Liberia, India, and Bangladesh, in addition to powering homes so that women and girls can study at night. Our recent project in Western India, we have installed a solar-powered computer lab so that the girls have access to education and thus ensuring a more gender equal future. I would like to end by saying that guaranteeing the rights of women and giving them opportunities to reach their full potential is critical, not only for attaining gender equality, but also for meeting a wide range of climate and sustainability goals. Mainly due to the socio-cultural norms and wrong perceptions, women are continually oppressed and their work remains overlooked. It is high time that we put a stop to this injustice faced by women in forests. We need to establish strong circular bioeconomies that address the gender bias and actually recognize the contributions of women. Circular bioeconomies provide us with a substantial solution that helps us resolve this gender gap while focusing on better preservation of the forests. Only by recognizing and utilizing the skills and expertise of these women can we sustain our precious forests. Empowered women and girls contribute to the health and productivity of their families, communities, and countries, creating a ripple effect that benefits everyone and nature. By empowering girls and women, we stand a chance of facing the current problems of food security, deforestation, and climate change that threaten humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pragna, for sharing Green Hope Foundation's work. And yes, empowered women do empower the world. So we need an urgent shift in our way of thinking, in our way of acting, to really ensure that women all around, women and girls and all of our diversity all around the world are recognized as the leaders of this forest protection and nature rebuilding movement, so that we are able to create that sustainable future. Thank you once again. And with that, I would like to thank all of our panelists for sharing your views, your interdisciplinary views with us today. This has been so amazing. We do have time for maybe a couple of questions. So the first question that we have is, establishing local circular bioeconomies would require building of new skill sets amongst stakeholders. So how should the education system be morphed to aid this? The floor is open. Yes, I see Mr. Tripathi has raised his hand. You're on mute.
I think it's a very good question. The challenge is that currently the entire education system, no matter the subject or the area of study, is focused around input first. If you're talking agriculture, it's more about what seeds you find, whether it's terminator genes or the normal indigenous seeds, or you have synthetic chemical farming, how much nitrates or phosphates or phosphorus you put in, and then how much yield you can expect. So it's an input first education system. If it was nature first, if everything was taught around nature, for example, in very simple terms, we are told that if you can't swim and you jump into a body of water, you would die. You would drown and you die because you can't breathe anymore. You can float for only as long and then you die. Same with oxygen. Fundamental learning that it is nature first. If you are in a place that has no oxygen for you, you're putting your life at risk. But in our consumption patterns, in our natural resource utilization, there is no concept of nature first. What we practice in terms of, if you take agriculture, is something called nutrient mining. You go into virgin territory, you take off the forest, you start agriculture, then the land dies, the microbial life dies, the subsoil strata, everything dies. Then you move on to another frontier. Unfortunately, there's no planet B. So I think the education system has to be really reoriented around nature first. That's what needs to live for all of us to live. And once that happens, I think it's much easier to have a conversation around a circular bioeconomy. When it is nature first, it is a circular bioeconomy. Nobody has ever seen anybody putting a pinch of fertilizer or pesticide in a virgin rainforest. Nature takes care of itself. You don't need chemicals to bring back plants alive. So that's, I think, is something useful to keep in mind when we are thinking about reorienting the way we teach ourselves, the way we educate ourselves. The second thing I would like to suggest is that the famous futurist Alvin Toffler, he said that the illiterate of the 21st century will be those that cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So we really need to unlearn whatever it is that we know, because that has brought us where we are now. And we really need to relearn respecting nature, caring for nature, and living within the bounds of nature. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi. Yes, I see Elizabeth has raised her hand. The floor is yours.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, just also quickly to add, that was a really great point raised. And I think so often, sometimes you even sometimes see it more oftentimes than, probably at least I see it in my work than I like to admit, is the fact that in the end, the experts in this field are really the women, in addition to the men, but really the women that are involved in this, that are living in these forest dependent communities. And so often they're such an immense source of power and knowledge that are never harnessed as much as they can, nor should be, in our work. And very often you have this top down approach, and it really need to put the power back into the hands of the people that can really guide us to how this can be done most effectively, and to give them that power and that in that process, and let their voices be heard. So just to add that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I think we have time for one more question. If anyone has any other answers to this question, or if not, then yes, we shall move on to our next question, which is, how can we enhance the private-public sector cooperation to create greater benefits for women in forest-dependent economies? Once again, the floor is open. Feel free to unmute.
I think it's, ideas are great, and ideas are very important in the current context, because that's what is going to help us, if at all, tide over this existential crisis. But ideas need money, and money needs to get to the grassroots where the women are, the women with the ideas are, and that's not happening at a scale that needs to happen. And I was, until very recently, heading the Environment Management Group of the UN as the ASG of UNEP based in New York. And one of the things that we often debated and discussed, that the UN is more a supply side conversation. It's a great gathering place, great convening power. You bring together the corporations, the bank CEOs, and the heads of state and government, but things just simply do not go down to the grassroots. So I think the civil society and the young people actually are doing a phenomenal job, including yourself, Kekashan. I don't want to embarrass you by putting you in a spot, but I think that's the great hope, that we really need to work at the grassroots to incubate great ideas, find those champions, and work with them to mitigate the risks that prevent money from flowing into the hands of the people that can actually make a difference. In the absence of that, we'll keep talking. We've been talking for 50 years. It's time to act.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi. I see Jan, you've unmuted.
I'm not sure I'm going to answer that specific question. I think there are people better qualified to do that than I, and it might make a very interesting second panel for you to organize, Kekashan, to talk exactly about that issue with some people who are better qualified. But I did want to raise one issue I didn't include in my talk, and that is there are some communities and cultures that put a lot of credit on women, who elevate them to leaders, and who wish to remain as they are. They don't want to change the practices they have. And all I'm saying is we need to note and appreciate that those cultures and allow them to change or evolve as they wish. Most of them already practice the circular bioeconomy approach as it is. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to add any final comments before we conclude? If not, yes, Gertrude, would you like to add something?
I'd like to add, usually private public partnerships, or if you're going to talk about the private sector, usually comes high-handedly. They come high-handedly, but that's what I was talking about in our governments taking responsibility, to broker, so that when they come, there's free, prior, and informed consent. There's the spirit of wanting to cooperate, not to dominate, that we have genuine talks with the private sector. And then we put our issues on the table. And for them, they might be profit driven, but we also want profit. We may not want our profit in economic terms. We do want money, but we may not want the profit as you would call a private company. But we would like our considerations to be taken into account. Our claims, our worries, would like to put our suggestions. When we participate, when we make input, we want it used to make decisions. So we don't want to be ignored. This top-down approach should stop. And another thing is that we don't want to be factored in as another stakeholder. We are rights holders to natural resources. We indigenous peoples, local communities, we are rights holders to natural resources. We don't want to get lost in translation. When they call us stakeholders, they assume that we have equal power. But when they know that we are rights holders, then they know that we have special needs that will have to be addressed. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank
I
you.
hope I've made myself understood.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gertrude. Pragna, I see a raised hand.
Yes. So, Keshav, just to answer your question, I was thinking that I believe private sectors can bring in technological advancements to their forest-dependent communities. Since forest communities, they already have the skills and expertise needed to know better resource management and etc. With the technological advancements and with the facilitation of these new technologies that the private sector will bring in, that would, I think, create a greater impact in the community. So that could be something that that collaboration could impact.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yes, and if there are any other comments, and if not, then I would like to invite all our panelists to give maybe a 1 to 2 minute concluding remarks. This has been such a wonderful panel, and we'll go in the same order as before. So Mr. Tripathi, the floor is yours.
Oh God.
Well, I just want to thank you for organizing this, and thank the wonderful audience that might be tuning in from different parts of the world, and also at the physical location of the World Forestry Congress, and the other esteemed panelists. And it's a delight to hear from you and to connect with you. We need to connect ever more stronger in a virtuous way, because as has been rightly said, the best genius in the current context is a collaborative genius. And we all need to collaborate way more effectively than we have in the past to be able to contribute to dealing with the crisis much more effectively than we have in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. When I spoke very much at the ground level about the woman who had to, or did as part of her role, find the parts of the trees that she could use to find energy. Now, and as I said, and others have said, this, the use of wood in that way is not going to change overnight. It is going to take a long time, if ever, to change that. However, as we've addressed during this speech, as Gertrude said and others have said, there are very sustainable practices already available. So can we identify those, and can we suggest ways to optimize what those communities are doing, and then spreading those policies? One of the things the World Future Council does, which I belong to, is to look at successful policies that are implemented. Good point made by several speakers. The need to implement, not just have the policy. There are implementation programs of policies put in place which are amazing and very successful. World Future Council does that. So we might, for example, suggest that we take a long, hard look at what these practices are on the ground in these communities and see how we can convey them to other like communities to see if they can internalize those practices using twigs and branches rather than the whole tree for the fuel source, for example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Elizabeth?
I know. I just want to say thank you so much for inviting UNDP again to speak on this very critical issue, and really nothing more to add. I think everyone has really covered all the points well, and the fact that this is a large critical issue that needs to be worked on effectively and efficiently, and yeah, collaboration and cooperation on it is key. We're all faced with constraints, be it time, budget, and so how to do that and do that most effectively, I think, is key. And I think having this conversation here is a really good start, and really will start to bring much more needed attention to this issue. So again, many thanks to the Green Hope Foundation for doing that. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gertrude?
I have to unmute. Yeah, the various presentations have shown me that we have hope. I've listened to everybody. I've listened to the experts like Elizabeth. I always like your presentations on gender. They are very inspiring. I don't know if you remember when we met in Naivasha.
I do. Hi. Sorry.
Yeah, hello. Yes. And I've listened to all these experts that you put together. It was a wonderful panel, and it has opened my mind a little more than, I mean, it has given me a perspective that I didn't have before. So we have a lot of hope in the circular bioeconomy addressing gender inequalities, correcting the wrongs of the past patriarchal system. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gertrude. Pragna?
Thank you so much, Kekshan. This was truly such an enlightening panel. I would just like to say that women have been the backbone of forest-dependent communities for such a long time, and it is high time that we recognize their contributions because they rightfully deserve a seat at the table. We need to establish strong circular bioeconomies that are actually hospitable to women, as it is vital for closing the gender gap as well as preserving our indispensable forests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pragna. And with that, I would like to thank all of our panelists for being with us today to speaking on this extremely important topic of addressing gender inequalities in forest-dependent communities through a circular bioeconomy. at the 15th World Forestry Congress. As all of our panelists have highlighted in their interventions, this is something that isn't spoken about as much, isn't acted upon much, and it's extremely important for all of us to redress the way we work, think, and act so that we are able to recognize the work and the leadership role of women in leading the transition to a just circular bioeconomy, women who have been practicing the concept of a circular bioeconomy for centuries. And it is imperative that we achieve this just transition right now, because if not, then we are dooming humanity and our planet to an unjust, unsafe, and a world that isn't healthy for everyone. So it is critical that we come together, all stakeholders, and understand that women are critically important in rebuilding our forest dependent communities and rebuilding our planet. And it is imperative that we move ahead with this mindset with us. So thank you once again for being with us today. Enjoy the rest of the World Forestry Congress, and we at Green Hope Foundation look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, and goodbye.
Bye.
Here.